I'm Effie Parks. Welcome to Once Upon a Gene, the podcast. This is a place I created for us to connect and share the stories of our not-so-typical lives. Raising kids who are born with rare genetic syndromes and other types of disabilities can feel pretty isolating. What I know for sure is that when we can hear the triumphs and challenges from others who get it, we can find a lot more laughter, a lot more hope, and feel a lot less alone. I believe there are some magical healing powers that can happen for all of us through sharing our stories, and I'll take all the help I can get.
Once Upon a Gene is proud to be part of Bloodstream Media. Living in a family affected by rare and chronic illness can be isolating, and sometimes the best medicine is connecting to the voices of people who share your experience. This is why Bloodstream Media produces podcasts, blogs, and other forms of content for patients, families, and clinicians impacted by rare and chronic diseases. Visit bloodstreammedia.com to learn more.
Hello and welcome to Once Upon a Gene. I'm your host, Effie Parks. And if you are starting right here, know that there's one episode before this. We are doing a 4-part series on caregiver archetypes. These are simple patterns that we all slip into when life gets loud. It isn't therapy homework. It's a practical language for noticing your stress and choosing a kinder next step. So my guest is somatic therapist and happens to be my sister and has been a guide to me my entire life. She's helped me spot my stress loops, my thought patterns and systems, and has always been such a teacher to me to be more aware, more compassionate, and to honor and improve on these patterns and bits of language that show up for me. She appeared first on the episode number 29, which is one of my favorite episodes to this day. Please go listen to it. She talks about your 4 oxygen masks, your non-negotiables, self-care for caregivers. So please go check that out if you haven't. And on episode 239, she also talks about how physical stress shows up in the body. So also a really good episode to listen to. And so again, we're in the second episode of the 4-part series. And it's really fun. I hope you've heard episode 1. I hope that you feel a little funny about it. And I hope you're also kind of dialed in and excited because it's different and it's fascinating. And again, Christy has been such a guide to me, and I would not be the woman that I am today without her. So have a sip of water and just open your mind and get curious. Today's archetype is the prostitute. So that's what we're going to introduce, also referred to as the worth/value. It asks, what part of myself am I trading for approval, peace, or love? We'll talk about integrity, pricing your energy, and saying no, like a queen, without the guilt hangover. So please enjoy my conversation with Christy Foster on the worth-value prostitute archetype. Hello, Christy. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, Effie. Thank you for having me back.
Yes, I'm so excited to continue the conversation about archetypes surrounding caregivers to medically complex kids. It's super fascinating to me. I can never get enough of learning about archetypes. So I'm excited to dig into another one today. Today we're talking about the prostitute, which I do have to say is sort of a strange name for it, but it makes sense when you learn about it. Mm-hmm. Just going to soak up all of your juices. So you can start with defining it for me, I suppose.
Great. So I will start by defining an archetype. So an archetype, remember, is a pattern of energy. It's patterns that we behave in, that we think in, and they're neutral. And remember, as we go through these 4 what are called survival archetypes from Carolyn Mace, and my understanding and spin on that based on my own experience is these are patterns that each one of us as human beings hold, like 4 legs of a table. And when there is stress or patterns that we run into that we don't understand, these archetypes get activated in our psyche and in our body. So my intention with this podcast is to help you as listeners understand and dance with the archetypes. So when you notice the patterns, acknowledge and begin to move out of the patterns. So it's an in and out while we're alive. Sometimes people think that, oh, I need to get rid of that, or that's a bad part of me. No, it's a part of you that everyone has. And the more that we can work with it, that is called integration of these parts. So that's my short, not so short introduction of archetypes.
That's a good reminder, because I feel like sometimes when you're in the shadow side of any of these archetypes, you might feel like shame and things like that. So that's a good reminder.
Well, it's really important that this conversation is not about judgment or adding more guilt or shame. It's about learning to offer compassion to the parts of ourselves that have had to make hard choices in order to feel safe, loved, and supported.
I've been re-listening to all my Carolyn Mace books. I do that every once in a while, and I feel like I hear it for the first time every time I listen to it. But I was revisiting The Prostitute recently, and she talks about it revolving around our self-worth and sort of giving up our integrity for whatever, validation or approval or security. So how do you see the prostitute showing up for caregivers of medically complex kids?
Let me go into a little more definition. I will go into that, a little more definition of what the prostitute archetype is. When we hear the word prostitute, our natural inclination is to think of a literal prostitute, a woman who sells her body, and or men, both do them, tends to be women, for money, which creates safety, which creates a resource for her. Now, the prostitute archetype within the caregivers, prostitute has to do with what are we giving away of ourselves to create or pull in this safety piece. Because sometimes as a caregiver, you're going to have to make impossible decisions that are related to your time and your energy, and you feel like you're being pulled in 1,000 directions. And you're giving up these pieces of your time, of your identity. And it's not because you're weak or overwhelmed. It's literally out of love and survival, love for your child, the person you're caregiving, and your own survival. What are those pieces? And this is the landscape, if you will, that the prostitute archetype lives in. And it's so important that we meet this archetype without having shame, but really coming in to a deep understanding of what that price is that you, as a caregiver of a child with special needs, that price is very high, and most people can't understand that unless they've walked in your shoes. So as we begin, I want to take you back to the Wizard of Oz. This will be my reference point for each archetype. If we go back to the Wizard of Oz and remember all of the characters in the Wizard of Oz represent us as human beings. And in the Wizard of Oz, we have the Tin Man representing the archetype of the prostitute. What that Tin Man represents, if you think of tin and the metal within the story, he lost access to his heart. He lost access to his intuition. And there became a rigidity in his heart, in his way of being, and he forgot how. And I see Effie as a caregiver. Because it requires so much of you, you lose that aspect of you to trust your heart, to go back to those, what's important to me and what can I call in as self-care and taking care of me, what brings me pleasure. All of the things that you probably don't get very much within being a caregiver, because your first and foremost priority is the child. And the dangerous part with that, hence prostitute, is what am I giving up as a caregiver, as a mother, as a father, to take care of my child? That's difficult. That's really difficult. And with the prostitute archetype, it's important to, I think, write down and ask, what does it feel like I've given up? So Effie, I'd ask you that as we go in. What do you feel like you've given up in the beginning of your journey to where you are today? What do you notice the difference between the beginning to today?
Okay, that's a big question. It's funny because I just gave a talk at a rare disease patient advocacy conference, and my talk was titled remember who you are. And I made lots of jokes about mom saying that to us. So yeah, I would say I was really surprised when I was like digging back into the prostitute with this lens because I didn't expect it to be about self-care. You know, I didn't expect that because I think when I first started learning about this, I wasn't really in this space. So I would say that in the beginning, you know, you totally you lose yourself, right? And you sacrifice your needs, you sacrifice your health, you sacrifice your relationships, you sacrifice your money. I mean, like every single thing, you're literally just like giving it to the demands of taking care of your kid. And so I think at different times you notice one thing that maybe got really far away, right? Like I gained some weight. I'd never gained weight in my entire life. That happened. I started feeling physically unhealthy at some point. That also had never happened. I've been a very active person my whole life. Happened. All of it happened. The things that have really like shook me, I've been really working to like gain back and to remember who I was, right? Like I always think about what mom said. And I use that as my guide like all the time, even though I still like totally joke about it. It's real. So like, and Casey, thank goodness, you know, I have a partner who's like pro me, right? So he's like, Effie, I can see where you're going right now. I need you to just leave the house and go take a 5-mile walk. Like those things are really obvious to me now. Whereas before I was like, I have to get this done. I have to do this. I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that. So it's everything, Christy, but I think some of them have bothered me more than others about what I really need for myself.
Yeah, it kind of pulls in. We'll stick with the prostitute, but it kind of can pull in the martyr archetype.
Yeah.
Which is not the same thing, but it's similar. And remembering within the prostitute archetype, it's remembering that you're not selfish for having needs. That's the light aspect of the prostitute archetype, is that your time matters, your rest matters, and your truth matters. I would ask you as a listener, what is your truth? For you, Effie, sometimes that's where Casey has to say, you need to go for a walk. Because when overwhelm happens in our brains, those neural synapses get all crazy and tangled, and you're not thinking clearly, you're reacting. And so for you to take a walk and come back into your body and take some breaths and go out into Mother Nature, walk away from that container of your children, you're able to go, I am human. I do get to walk. I do get to experience the sun on my face without a child next to me, and really come back into self, into sovereignty. We'll pull that back in, that the adult in you from child does have a choice to stand in the sun, to go on a walk, to have your needs met. And the need can be as simple as going on a walk. Guilt is a powerful force. And identity of, I think it's and Effie, I would say this is a play on words, that you're saying, I remember mom saying, remember who you are. And I'm going to challenge that with part of our mother's archetypal pattern is the price of sacrifice. And we were raised in that context of a good girl does this, a good wife does this, a good mother does this, which is serve and give, to the point of fatigue, to the point of not even knowing what those needs are. Are you following me so far?
Totally. Yes.
Okay. And what I would say is, when you remember that phrase, remember who you are, which is what mom, she would say, remember who you are and where you come from. And I always remember thinking, I don't think I want to do that.
I think I blocked out the second part. Like, I do not remember the second part to that.
I do. But that's my rebel archetype. That's my rebel going, I don't think so. That's funny you forgot that. But no, that comes in too. And the aspects that I like to really glean from that phrase of our mother is, remember who you are, is that you are loving, you are giving, you're kind, and you also get to receive all of that in return. That reciprocity versus being in shadow of the prostitute is not having reciprocity.
Yeah. Well, and another way I've been taking it, and I don't know if this switches the archetype of the remember who you are, but like, hey, you're so much more outside of this. Like you like doing this and you like doing this and you're good at this. And remember that about you because you give yourself away.
Yes,
and like you
which
just
is
said, you
prostitute.
forget. You forget what you even like.
Yes, because all of that energy gets funneled into the caretaking. And there's always an emergency. There's always a need, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think it becomes so complicated for you and your audience is that doesn't go away. Okay, and it's a part of it. So with the prostitute archetype, to be able to identify what are the parts of me that feel lost. So you mentioned weight and walking and taking care of yourself. Those parts got lost and you found them. That's bringing the prostitute out of shadow, out of the parts that you couldn't see until you started gaining weight and you physically saw, oh, I'm gaining weight and probably losing muscle tone because you weren't exercising. So you lost a part of yourself and now you brought it back. That's the light of the archetype is the lover. It's the desire. What are your desires? And to ask yourself as a listener that has a child that is challenging, what are my desires that I've put on the shelf or maybe left them under the bed because I haven't visited those for a long time? And sometimes that really takes not being in your house because the need doesn't ever go away. To walk outside or to have someone watch your kid for an hour or two and really come into your heart, not your head. And that's where tears start coming because they do, and that's healthy. The lover is about what we feel. What did we lose? What did we give up for our child's safety, security, and belonging? We sacrificed, we prostituted ourselves, and not in a shameful way. That's a very loving way. But the price gets too expensive when we're not putting back what is we're putting out. And then that, for me in my somatic world, that's when disease sets in long term, because sometimes even of the expression of, this is so goddamn hard. I don't like this. There's guilt. And that guilt starts to drip like water on in a corner of your house that you can't see, and then mold comes. And then it starts to grow and grow internally in our somatic system. And it starts out as energy first, and then it becomes dense and it becomes a weight. Like you said, I started to gain weight, and that energetic weight can turn into colitis. It can turn into migraines. It can turn into jaw clenching. It can turn into constipation or diarrhea. It starts energetically and then becomes physical weight. And the understanding of it and slowing down in what we're talking about is really important because your heart's involved.
The slow drip to mold is a really good visual. And I wonder, do you think that we always know, like really in our gut, that that's happening? We just aren't like accepting or looking, or
I would
can
say
it be both?
I think it's both. I think that our own intelligence, which is our body, knows. I think our intellect and our mind will override it. So even if we go back to remember who you are, and please know, Mother, I'm not bashing you as I speak on this, but it's really important to understand that the pattern that you were shown is sacrifice, Effie. It's sacrifice for another. And I always tell Mom, you have a ticket right into heaven. They'll be waiting with the car when you die. Because her whole life has been about sacrifice and giving and taking off her coat and putting it in the mud so you could walk over it. That's been the value system. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about equality within self and understanding what is your value system. Yes, it's serving and taking care of child, and it also has to be taking care of self. But it's very challenging because sometimes we'll say in our heads, Well, that's just who I am. That's how I was raised. That's remember who you are. But sometimes, Effie, that isn't necessarily a good thing. If it's in shadow of sacrifice to the point that you become sick or so burned out that you can't function and you're a zombie getting dressed with your eyes open. That's shadow aspect of prostitute, of not paying attention to the signs. Because our bodies do know. Dr. Gabor Mate has, I think, the best podcast about givers, and I'll give you the link, but he talks about, and the research being done, the more that is ignored, because I do think we know and we don't know. It's both. The more that we ignore that, the more sick we become. And eventually, and the book is called The Body Says No, the body says, no, you're not going to keep doing that. And you get really sick. Sometimes people get in an accident. Sometimes things happen to force you to rest. And I encourage you not to get to that point because I see it all the time in my practice. I've seen it in my own life because I'm trying to outwill or outthink or outpush what my body is saying. You better rest, or I'm going to get sick, or you're going to trip and smash your face on the sidewalk because you weren't paying attention. You're moving too fast. But this isn't an intellectual process. It's a heart process.
I mean, I know there's several types of caregivers listening right now. And I know there are some that are like, oh my gosh, this is speaking to my soul. And I know there is another part that is saying, you have no idea what my life is like and how hard it is. And I don't have a village and I can't. So what would you say to those sort of two perspectives?
I think a village is all relative. I really do. A village can be one person, Effie. A village can be one person of a neighbor and someone to say, could you sit with my child for 30 minutes while I go on a walk? And or I think it's so personal and everyone's story is personal and every experience matters. And I don't think there's a one answer for that. I think there's so many pieces to be excavated around being held in the challenge of that, Effie, and then taking a deep breath with someone to help them see, okay, let's move the right foot forward first and see where we go. Because it's not fair of me to even pretend I know the answer to that question. What I do know is that village can be one person and a guide within that to say, okay, Effie, let's take a deep breath and we're going to open the window today and we're going to look at the sun. And what tends to happen when we're in the overwhelm is you say, I don't want to do another damn thing today, even looking at the sun. I can't do that. And as a guide, I'm going to use myself as that example. I would sit with you and maybe open your eyes with my fingers and say, yes, we're looking at the sun. Let's take a deep breath together and slow down. Because it's so overwhelming that even that seems overwhelming. So there isn't I wish I had a perfect answer. I don't.
We just need to find someone to pull our eyelids open. That's step
like
one.
Stick toothpicks in your eyes.
I'm pretty sure I feel like I actually have a memory of someone doing that for me.
Well, I'm sure you do.
That's so funny.
I'm sure you do. We can't do this alone, which is why you created the podcast. So even if someone's listening that says, Effie, you have all of this and I don't have anything. You have a village. I would challenge that to say, okay, that may be true. And today you're listening to a village. And what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to stay in the archetypal pattern of no choice? Or can you sit with us and be open to, okay, Effie's creating a village through this podcast. I'm going to receive the village and maybe make a different choice tomorrow. To keep it very simple, because what we are talking about is so complex. in your world. And I don't pretend to know what that is.
So what are sort of the positive expressions of this archetype / what are sort of the behaviors to notice and how to shift them? I guess those are two totally separate questions. So what are the things that we should recognize in ourselves? I know we mentioned several from myself, but
I think one of the most important ones would be that you are not selfish for having needs. That's probably the biggest one with this archetypal pattern, and that you're not broken because of how challenging this experience is that you're having. And what are the positives of this are understanding a need, that you belong to a village, which is the podcast, that you have resources based on, and I know, Effie, you have lots of people that you've interviewed that offer resources. If anything, I could tell you the positive would be, okay, I have a resource on Once Upon a Gene podcast. I'm going to go on and pick one today. Because when we're in overwhelm, seriously, our brains don't work. They don't. And sometimes it helps to go on and look at your podcast, for example, and say, okay, what is best for me today? Because I have no idea. It's really allowing yourself to believe that there is a choice and there is a resource today in the moment you have.
Choice. I've heard that on a couple conversations I've had on the podcast just in the last couple of days. It came up in every single interview I did this week from the other person saying that we have a choice, which is another thing that parents like me say, right? Like, I do this because I don't have a choice.
Right. And that's true, Effie. What is the choice that you have in that not having a choice? Okay, yes, that's true. And what do you have a choice at around that?
One of the things to sort of be aware of is how we're using language, which I know you talk about a lot. And really, exploring all the rings within it, right? Like, I don't have a choice. You would do the same. But what about the choice within the choice? Within the no choice? Yeah. Yeah. And really making
it's a paradox.
Simple. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Because otherwise you're going to blow up.
You'll implode or you'll explode.
Yeah.
Well, energy has to move. And if you hear one thing out of my mouth today as a listener, energy has to move. We are energetic beings. If they cut us up and put us on a microscope, they would see that our cells are moving, right? They're dying and they're being recreated. So, and when there's that kind of stress, there's an implosion, which is a shutdown, frozen, or an explosion, which is rage, which is screaming, which is throwing a table out the window. Both are the same on that scale. So if you feel one or the other coming, what's your pattern? We all know our own pattern. I implode, or I will go into frozen state. When I notice myself doing that, here's the dance with the shadow prostitute is, Christy, you're not meeting your needs. What needs to be met? And the choice there, Effie, is no, I can't change my circumstance, but I can change what I do right now in this moment. You can go in the bathroom and lock the door and sit for 10 minutes and take some deep breaths. That's a choice in a very complex situation. To calm back down, to scream perhaps, to breathe perhaps, to take a bat to a pillow perhaps. Move the energy out of the body so the body doesn't shut down. Write, sing, shake, dance. Those are the choices that I'm talking about. I don't have a magic wand and no one does. But as a caregiver, I say this so gently. You do have a choice.
So you recommend that caregivers obviously still give. So how can they still give without losing themselves in the process and also maybe gain something for themselves?
I think you need to figure out what you've lost. So, Effie, you said in the beginning of the podcast, I realized I put on weight and I wasn't exercising. So those are two things you lost: time and self-care of what I'm eating. You need to identify one or two things that you've lost in your process.
Okay, that's actually, when you said that, I kind of went, identify what you lost. Like, that's a really big job. And
Yes.
How do you know if you're identifying the right loss? Like, how do you know?
I think you trust yourself and the first thing that comes to your mind. Otherwise, you're going to, I call it mental masturbation. You're going to keep looping and looping and looping because you can't get out of your loop. And I would invite you to keep it really simple. What did I used to do that I can't do today? You said walk. You said eat well. Keep it so simple. I used to love to read. I used to love to go to the club and go dancing or go have a glass of wine with my friends. I used to love to write. I used to love to draw. What piece do you feel like you've lost that you believe you can't have anymore because of the situation you're in? Please know there's not a right and wrong, because then you just re-layer shame. That's not helpful. What are the parts that have been lost? And can we invite that part in once a month or once a week by choice, very consciously? And it might be really challenging. I'm not going to say it isn't. But the identification is important. And then the receiving, which is the lover, the light side of the prostitute of that receiving. But only you can identify what has been lost.
Is there a good way to remember how to use and trust your gut?
How I do it, Effie, with my clients, and I think this has been the best thing I've found is, and it comes from the Heart Math Institute. It doesn't come from me in this process. But what you do is you get in a quiet space, which can be the bathroom, just whatever works, that you can shut the door and be quiet, and take some deep breaths and feel your breath literally go into your nose. So you feel air come in and you feel the air go out, feel your rib cage expand. So we come back into the body, and then you place one hand on your heart. You place one hand on your belly, eyes closed if possible. And then you connect with the feeling of gratitude and emotion for something. It could be that I have clean water to drink. It could be your child. It could be your spouse. And to connect to what it feels like. And the research has shown that as you connect to gratitude for one thing, the heart opens as its own brain. And then you ask, once you feel connected with this breath, is, my dear heart, what is it I need today for my own healing? And that could be a drink of water, to walk outside. It will show you as usually a picture or a word. And then once it shows up, you stay with that feeling of gratitude and say, thank you, I receive that right now in present time. And what it feels like to receive it. That's what I would tell you. And it is a practice of mindfulness and to activate your heart instead of your brain. And trust yourself, whatever that is. I don't care how stupid your brain thinks it is. Because that's when we get in our own way, right? Can you practice trusting your heart instead of your head?
Yeah, I feel like I was just on vacation, actually, listening to that moment.
Oh, well, good.
It reminded me of, I've been doing hot yoga almost every day since like September. And I usually have always counted on box breathing, for those moments of like overwhelm and super stress. This yoga instructor who I hadn't seen did that kind of breathing, which I know I've done at some point. I just don't remember when, where you like hold one nostril and you breathe in that one, and then you hold the other one and you breathe out that one. And then she had you holding your stomach, and then she had you thinking about something, almost this exact thing. And I was like, holy cow. I mean, it literally like activated like every sensory piece on my body, and I was super aware of what I was doing. And I don't know how to explain it, but I was happy afterwards. I was literally smiling. I saw myself in the mirror, and I guess it was just something I added to my toolbox, but it was sort of this moment that you sort of explained with the heart and the body coming together. And I don't know, something that simple. And again, like you said, it's a practice. Like I've found that it's just like when I started lifting weights, right? Like 5 pounds used to give me muscle fatigue so quickly. And then you'd move up and you'd move up and you'd move up faster than you think you could because it's so hard on each level. And it's kind of like this, like when you stay in sync with yourself as much as you possibly can, it's easier to sort of revisit that if you need to in a time of, super bad.
Well, and Effie, you said, and I can't emphasize this enough, trauma, and I would say having a child with disabilities is trauma. And there's so many layers to that. The simplicity of taking a breath is not simple. And it is. There's another paradox. Yeah?
Totally.
What do you mean I have to breathe? I can't do another thing. What do you mean I have to open my eyes to look at the sun? I can't do that. So you say it's so simple, and I would challenge that it's as complex as it is simple when you're activated.
Totally.
The word
yes.
I love, and I need to get who said this because I was watching a baseball interview on ESPN with Trent. It's some old baseball player coach. I'll get the name. But he came up with a word called simplexity. And that is my most favorite word, especially related to trauma and related to how people flippantly say, well, Effie, you have a choice. You should do blah, 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 blah. I want to smack them because, yeah, we do have a choice and it's easy to say that. But when you're overwhelmed, it doesn't feel like we do. And that's the simplexity of the complexity.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, we don't need to add more shame to go, I don't have a choice, right? And go into that whole craziness in the mind. I know you said it was simple, Effie, but I don't believe you in that it's been so complex. It sounds simple and it isn't. That is the paradox that you sit in as a caregiver.
Yeah. I wonder what I meant by that, when I felt that or said that. Like, I wonder what it was.
Well, it was coming back into your body and not your head, Effie.
Yeah.
You were experiencing your own self independent from the situation. That is grounded embodiment. And you're like, oh my God, I feel better.
I mean,
yes,
and I like myself. So when I get to actually be with just me, like, it's a party.
But I would hope that for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but that takes layers of work to unravel the parts that were placed on you first. And that takes time, and it takes introspection, and it takes the witnessing of a friend, right? It's not something we do by ourselves. It's always reflected back to us from others who love us. I love you, Effie, because of blank. And then we start to absorb those pieces and they become part of us. I like who I am, but that's been a lot of work. Some people don't have that issue. I do. I've had it because of the different layering of beliefs of who I was told that was. Let alone I don't have a child with disabilities. That's a whole other layer. And I trust that the process, Effie, that you're doing and offering to people is this, that you matter. You meaning everyone listening, and you, Effie, you matter. How do I matter? Only we can answer those questions. No one else can tell us. They can reflect it to us, but we have to ask that to ourselves and value a walk and value a drink of water and value a nap.
All of those things are so luxurious.
That's the lover from the prostitute. That is the light of the prostitute, the simplicity of it.
So I guess, what do you leave, advice-wise, for these caregivers who are struggling to balance the self-sacrifice with their deserved identities and their well-being while they're caring for these kids? Like,
I would say today to bring it back to the simplicity of noticing your breath. And you don't have to take a deep breath. You don't have to do all these fancy breath techniques, but to notice your breath go into your body and notice it go out. And maybe today say no to someone. And that could be your child of, I'm going to rest. That could be anything. What could you say no to today? Could be no to your over-serving and saying yes to too many things. And to take 5 minutes today to remember that you have a heart. As we go back to the Tin Man, the only way the Tin Man could move was to add oil. And oil and fluid in our body is emotion. It's symbolic. Unless we feel and experience our heart, we become rigid in our thinking and in our way of moving. How are you feeling today? Ask yourself that. And I would write it down. Check in with you. That would be my suggestion. And please let me say, I feel nothing is an answer. That's an answer. And people sometimes tend to judge that as, well, I don't feel anything. I would argue and say, no, that is the answer. And thank you for sharing. Because numb is a trauma response. That's a feeling.
I call it going ice.
Yeah. Well, it's a trauma response. It's frozen. And that is a feeling, Effie, is my point. It matters that you are aware that you don't feel anything. Because only from there can we move into something else.
Okay. Is there anything that I didn't, or that we didn't touch on about the prostitute this episode?
I don't think so. I think the main thing to remember is it's about our value, our internal value system of our needs being met, and inviting in pleasure. Pleasure can be a walk, a nap, a drink of water, a good meal. Good sex is always nice. But if that's not possible, right? And
there's a lot of Netflix series that are sort of similar that you could go to instead, Yeah. Lots of options around that.
There are. And so maybe make a list today of things that you love, because the prostitute is about love and pleasure. Into the lover. What are those things? What are the things I've forgotten about who I am that got lost in the shuffle of the child? And have a list so you see them on paper. And I would suggest, and I have my clients do this, to place it on a little, I call it an altar space, where I put a picture of me when I'm little. I put my intention, and I would write those down. So when I feel frozen or overwhelmed, I can go and look at my list and go, maybe I need to just look outside and look at the tree. Keep it super simple. But that is the essence of the prostitute archetype.
The trees work.
We all have it. They do work.
They do.
They do work because they're representation of intelligence. And we are intelligence, and we can connect to that and remember that we come from Mother Nature. We have all of the elements in us. That's why it works. It's a connection back to what is real, which is intelligence.
Okay, again, I'm just going to continue to do deep dives on archetypes because they're never-endingly fascinating. The next episode after this one is about the Saboteur. So I'm putting these out all in a row so you can binge if you need to. But that one's what's coming up next.
Thank you, Effie.
I hope you've been enjoying this podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this show with your people, and please make sure to rate and review it on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also head over to Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to connect with me and stay updated on the show. If you're interested in sharing your story, or if you have anything you would like to contribute, please submit it to my website at effieparks.com. Thank you so much for listening to the show and for supporting me along the way. I appreciate y'all so much. I don't know what kind of day you're having, but if you need a little pick-me-up, Ford's got you.